Well, joining us now on Encounter is someone who really doesn't need an introduction, but we'll give him one anyway. He's a legendary broadcast journalist who is a longtime anchor for CBS Evening News, and over the course of his career has covered every major story from the past 40-plus years on. And now he's hosting a new Access TV documentary series called Dan Rather Presents. And the first subject that he is tackling is America's mental health crisis. So first of all, thanks so much for being with us today, Dan.
Kevin, thank you very much for having me on.
Now, I know this series takes an overall look at the nation's mental health crisis, which I believe I saw some estimates at about 25% of the U.S. population. But I know you're emphasizing in particular the state of Nevada, which has had a pretty bad track record for dealing with the mentally ill. Could you set the scene for us? How bad was it in the state?
Well, Nevada, and particularly Las Vegas, was a major perpetrator of what we call the Greyhound homeless. That is the dumping of patients who are struggling with mental disorders. In many, many cases, hundreds of cases, well over 1,000, really 1,600 cases, they put people on Greyhound buses, buy them a ticket and say, listen, when you get to San Francisco or Portland or any other city, just call 911. The dumping of patients. And Las Vegas has gotten a lot of bad publicity as a result of that. They've taken some steps, but here's the point. This is a national problem. Las Vegas is not the only place dumping patients on Greyhound buses and shipping them out. A lot of places are doing it. And the reason is because the jails are overcrowded with people who are struggling with mental disorders. The emergency rooms of hospitals are swamped by it. There are not enough hospital beds to deal with it. What happened was, as a nation, as a people, we decided 50 years ago that psychiatric hospitals were nightmares for people with mental disorders. So we started closing psychiatric hospitals, and nothing took their place. And that, as a consequence of that, the social systems, the jails, the emergency rooms, the hospitals that can deal with this problem are overwhelmed. So people get desperate. I'm not excusing what Las Vegas did and what other cities do, but they say, listen, we just can't handle this, so put them on a Greyhound bus, ship them someplace else. This is an outrage, and I think as a people, as a nation, as a society, we're becoming to realize that. And the answer is not to go back to the old-fashioned psychiatric hospitals. The answer is a system of each community access to mental health care and medication, and keeping people as close to home as possible. This won't do away with mass shootings and violence and crime committed by people who have mental disorders, but it will drastically reduce it, and it is a national crisis.
Yeah, and talking about the psychiatric hospital too, you were able to get into this particular psychiatric hospital in Nevada about a year after this whole patient dumping scandal broke out. If you could talk to us about that experience too, and who you had the opportunity to speak with, and some of their explanations for this.
Well, this was the Rawson-Neal Hospital, which was a fairly new hospital, which was designed to help alleviate the problem. But they found themselves swamped almost from the beginning. They just had more demand for the services of people struggling with mental disorders than they could handle. And it all got backed up. It turns out the police are the main people who deal with homeless people who have mental disorders. And at Rawson-Neal, their explanation was they didn't make any excuses. They said, we did wrong by dumping patients, by putting patients on Greyhound buses and shipping them out. But they explained that their whole system, their jails got overwhelmed, the emergency room got overwhelmed, they didn't have the hospital beds to deal with it, and so in frustration they just said, you know what, let's put people on Grey Dog buses, ship them off to other cities and let some other city handle it. But they aren't the only ones who were doing this. This has been done on a national basis for some time. Thanks to the Sacramento Bee newspaper, it first got exposed, and frankly, I think we're the first people on national television to bring it to people's attention. I don't think any American of good conscience believes the way to deal with a homeless person who has a mental disorder is to put them on a Greyhound bus and ship them to some other city. Yeah, that's not the American way.
And you mentioned too about this, which you know, many people don't think about as well, the law enforcement community, how they are involved in this too. I'm sure people have encountered mental health people who have mental health issues, that is, on the street. And maybe if you could talk about that and how that it affects the law enforcement as well, who are faced with dealing with some of these individuals who are suffering from these issues.
Well, exactly, and I think most people in law enforcement will tell you that the police do the best they can, but the police are not, they're not trained to deal with people who are struggling with mental disorders, nor do they claim to be. But just by default, what happens is a homeless person on the street decides to parade through traffic naked and holds up traffic. Somebody calls the cops. There's nobody else to call. The cops come, and the best they can do is take him to jail. And in jail, in some communities, there's some facility to diagnose people, but by and large, they don't. They hold them in jail, and then once they're diagnosed as having mental disorders of some kind, then it's try to take them on someplace else. But eventually, there's no place to take them, so the police are left. Law enforcement doesn't want to deal with this problem, but as a last resort, they're having to deal with the problem. But again, let's get real. To deal with people struggling with mental disorders, that's not a job for the police. That's a job for our healthcare system, and it's a job the healthcare system is not dealing with.
Thank you so much, Dan, for speaking with us, and it's a very important topic. It was a pleasure speaking with you. It's One-Way Ticket to Nowhere, America's Mental Health Crisis, and that can be seen on Access TV. You can check with your cable guy to find out what channel Access TV is on in your area. Thanks again, Dan, for being with us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having me on.
Going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Encounter after this.